I guess I'm just cosplaying as like an anime character who's caught in an explosion. Damn, so I couldn't get my Novid submission out on time. I just couldn't do it. But you know what? You know who did? All of you. All 34 of you. Novid, which is an immensely poor neologism of November and COVID, was going to focus on lesser discussed shows because we, as part of AniTube, have the tools and community to do a lot of interesting and fun things with the shows that a lot of other platforms might not have an incentive or willingness to do. Don't ask me what I mean by that, because it actually made a lot more sense in my head. At the same time, the project is overall a celebration of a lot of really fascinating text, while allowing a lot of new content creators to really try and see if this is the right kind of content for them. And given that it's all in the interest of charity, it's just a fun and worthwhile challenge all around, I hope, for everyone involved. But before I get into the submissions, I want to say that the whole charity part, is actually thanks to a sponsor. Yeah, I got a sponsor, and it's not Dakumakura's this time. So, big shoutouts to Boxu. Hey, Videography Joe, get me some B-roll. Go. Boxu is a monthly premium Japanese snack box subscription service that tries to cast a wide net by sending you snacks and tea pairings from not only the greater Tokyo metropolitan area, but all over Japan. Every month you'll receive a box with monthly themes, and each one goes through a different part of Japan. So each month, you get a box from Box. Okay. All right, look, I know sponsorship reads are jank, but I did my research. I looked up the Reddit reviews, the most objective of all reviews, and the experience has been consistently good. They've currently got a Seasons of Japan thing going on. They've got snacks of all 4 seasons and a wide variety of locations, as well as a cultural guide that's included, giving you an idea of where they come from and who makes them. In the one box they sent me, which is phenomenal, right? They sent me like matcha cakes from Osaka, red bean donuts from Hokkaido, cookies from Kumamoto. 歌って一緒にビルの谷間の暗闇に And they sent me like 20 something things, and it gives you a breakdown of exactly where they all come from. I shared some of them with my folks, and my dad tried to take all the Meiji mochi puffs himself, so it works, and they're really good. And as for me, unfortunately, my favorite thing was their yuzu sake candy, which apparently is only available through Boxu, so if I gotta get more of them, I gotta go through them. Oh no. I really like this. Shit. Here's the skinny. They're sending premium Japanese snacks. I tried it. It's a great product. They're sponsoring the video. I don't know why I keep putting my fingers up. And, the money that they're paying me is going to charity, as well as to help pay for the people who have helped me on my channel. None of the sponsorship money is going to me. I gain nothing directly from this. If you want to support the channel, get some sicko mode treats and confectionaries for yourself, or as a gift, we've got Christmas. At least tell the company that it wasn't a huge mistake reaching out to me. Think about it this way. Suga's dumping all the Fukushima water into the Sea of Japan. Get those cookies before the radiation does. Get 10% off of your own authentic Japanese box from Box, and save up to $47 using code ALTHESER10. Link in the video description. So enough about confectionaries from the land of the rising sun. Let's talk about another aspect of Nihon Bunka. A lot of the Novid summaries, right, were done by either much smaller AniTubers and newer AniTubers, or, first-time AniTubers, and thus a lot of the faces here aren't necessarily people who have been doing it for a long time, but they might actually be the face of a new AniTube landscape. There are, however, quite a few veterans, so one of the biggest challenges, from my perspective, is understanding and coalescing a lot of these sorts of concerns, balancing these two, and trying to figure out exactly how much or how little attention you should give to particular groups. It's no surprise that many of the smaller creators might see this as an opportunity to grow their own audience through, me recommending their channel, which is a fundamentally doomed proposition, given that I'm bad enough at managing my own channel growth as it is. But Novid proves how, without a communal network, a lot of what would be otherwise immensely interesting content can easily fall by the wayside. Here's the thing. At the end of the day, the fundamental truth is this. Every content creator that submitted for this deserves a pat on the back. Well, not me. I don't know why I patted myself on the back. I didn't submit anything. And not an ironic one, okay? Because look at it this way. There's about a 90% chance that by focusing on something that isn't popular and proven by the algorithm, you will, in effect, not see the returns that you might expect going after the big fish. Work is work. And making videos requires work. If it didn't, then big YouTubers wouldn't be paying editors to edit their videos. So here's the question. What kind of work did we get? What kind of work did AniTube bring? It is insane seeing the shows that are covered. There is a huge amount of shows that I was completely surprised never got covered. Like, we've got really clear entries, right? Those that aren't really discussed, such as Mator and Rideback, or Ryu Tolkien and Karukuri Kiden, and Joji Matthews and Midnight Diner. Like, a few of these are pretty intuitive. They're lesser known and lesser discussed properties. Okay, cool, that makes sense. But then there are some other ones that completely threw me for a loop. It wasn't just lesser known shows. Poison Ivy did a breakdown of the entirety of Honey and Clover. Torano talked about Magic Knight Rayearth, and Urizen talked about Macross Plus. Like, look at it this way, how have we not, on a wider thematic level, talked about Macross Plus? Now, that's not to say that every single entry was like a deep thematic dive. The main requirement was to pick something and talk about it, and all that mattered was that you cared.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
A lot of the entries slotted into three general subjects. They were celebratory, they were formal analyses, or they were subcultural. And this video is going to talk briefly about each three. Let's start with the first one. Let's talk about celebratory analyses. Celebratory entries made up the majority of them, and what they are is pretty straightforward. Creators loved something about them or these shows in general and wanted to gush about it. A lot of the newer content creators tended to lean in this direction, and there were quite a few interesting standouts. I mentioned Ryu Tolkien and their recommendations of Karukuri Kiden, oh my god, I messed. But I also didn't mention the way in which they presented it.
Cohesive experience. Whether you're in the mood for adventure, some history, or just an unconventional mecha show, I cannot recommend Hero enough.
Their narration is a passionate celebration, with the kind of energy that you'd see in a sort of DVD trailer special. They've got this instant, consistent positivity that's incredibly infectious. Snake Eye Dreams also undergoes this really meaty beat-by-beat overview of some of the thematic structure of Qualia the Purple that at the same time acts as both recommendation and rumination of the series, tackling but never really going into a particularly concrete conclusion as to how the manga unfolds its discussion on a sort of cosmic phenomenology. And in this one, for a 33-minute video from a new editor, it moves surprisingly fast. And you don't even have to go there. There are unflinchingly passionate recommendations of works like Dakota Broski's, "Dakota, bro, what is this aspect ratio? You're making a manga video. What are you, Linus Tech Tips?" Seemingly off the cuff. I think it's off the cuff. Dakota, clarify. Recommendation of Dignified Sleeping Psyche. And you can tell this, really is his wheelhouse.
If it's a person, a child, a woman, I will fucking shut them the fuck up so you can enjoy your nap.
And oftentimes these celebratory pieces don't even stick to one particular element. Jump the Shark looks at Mamoru Oshii's Gozenzo-sama Banbanzai and likes to let the clips speak. They use these long entries that really show the life of the work, emphasizing the theatricality and staging of it all. And speaking of infectious, shaves.
Hey, it's Shabes, and welcome to another edition of AniTube Digest.
Shabes imbues a seemingly insurmountable energy into his recommendation of Senya Ichi Monogatari, interlocking not only back-end trivia, but also precisely why it works, and more generally the aesthetic culture that sort of undergirds it. But while recommendations made up a bulk of them, not every entry was specifically a recommendation. So let's go to the formal analyses. Let's talk about some of the big ones. There were some really good formal analyses. There's the obvious big ones, like Beyond Ghibli's Shinji Iwai formal retrospective, a sort of series of visual tendencies that grasp and inform how he reads Hana Alice, especially its animated sections. To Beyond Ghibli, it seems there's a sort of negotiation of balance and timing, pace and positioning, a sort of visual equilibrium that becomes even more pronounced and necessary when we move into animation. But while Beyond Ghibli opts for a somewhat comparative reading of Shunji Iwai, Clear and Sweet's reading stems more decidedly deconstructive, an involved breakdown of Aria the Origination's famous 4th episode. That here, within this scene, within this moment, the visual fabric is punctured and reconstituted. That on a visual and narrative level, everything collides into this engagement with the world of Aria with stark and clear vulnerability. His video weaves through the sequence like a journey, parsing out bits and bits with a structure closer to a mystery novel. And just as you might think it just might be you or him, he ends it strongly, so confidently strongly, on Junichi Sato's words.
電車の第4話ですね。いきなり剛速球が来たってやつですね。
でしたね。井上さんの剛速球は。
But it isn't just formal analyses as unfurling or engagement, but Novid submissions also got formal transformations. The Cine Clinic in Chiyo-chan no Sugakuro not only thinks about how you present new images in different media, but also the intended vibes of the original ones in new ones. In this sense, he's discussing, though never directly mentioning it, a sort of question of Gesamtkunstwerk, the totality of a piece, and how one might be translated, or even if the conditions of the new media might be different. If you've been writing jokes for manga, how do you compose jokes for manga for anime? And a similar question is asked by Seaweed Ambassador and their look at Kagewani, a look at not only the media rhetoric of both tokusatsu and kamishibai, but for anime. But while the Cine Clinic is discussing the way in which anime to manga jokes might be done, Seaweed is focusing on how the terror of Kagewani doesn't work in spite of its kamishibai roots, but seemingly because of it. And there are ones that broaden beyond their formal analyses into convention critique. Both What the What and Second Look discuss very different ends, the former discussing narrative beat and the latter discussing material ones. For What the What, he poignantly strikes at the heart of what defines and shapes the underdog story.
What I've noticed about most underdog stories is that they are less about a person without talent beating someone with talent, but more so about a person who believes themselves to be nothing realizing they are something.
And that even in the throngs of talent, seemingly crushing talent, there can be an isolating, alienating experience. Whereas in comparison, the Second Look looks at the physicality of the anime eye. Drawing from Lamar, he notes that because anime characters aren't real and lens aren't really ocular, there is no warping and distortion of physicality. So in this sense, how do you show it in animation? Well, it's through the eyes. And through Iria no Sora, Second Look discusses persistent shimmers of the television's white light, and kind of thinks about the way in which this fundamentally machinic medium thinks about how some of these concerns through one of the great titans of Sekai-kei fiction. Wait a minute, Sekai-kei? But Joe, that's sociocultural stuff. Well, transition. Let's start to talk about sociocultural analyses, because there's a few of them, and they're also really interesting. There we go. I hope you people are happy I said it. In the original video where I made this challenge, I framed it as expanding a corpus. A corpus has a lot of different sides. We can think of it with regards to what's discussed and how we can build upon it, or we can think of it as talking about ideas that are less talked about. Or we can talk about it as an expansion of pre-existing ideas affirmed by texts and examples that haven't been given a lot of attention. There kind of ended up being all of them, and it was actually a really interesting set of analyses. There ended up being a few strong ones, a few notably strong ones. Steve Sekai's look at Yusubu's potentially accidental critique of capitalism is not only interesting on a general basis, but actually pretty rigorous. He's careful not to proclaim it as simply as Yusubu's discussion of poor workplace culture, but also discusses the means in which global capital flows, shapes, and reshapes subjectivities, subjects within global capital flows, and how heroes and demons are on this sort of materialist bedrock that locks him into ideologies about who to fight, who to discriminate, and for what reasons. And I'll happily say this, I think Steve Sekai's video is quite a robust critique of global capital flow without ever needing to rely on any particular Marxist aesthetics. Even if the aesthetics in your videos kinda sucks, bro. Like, I know where it comes from, alright, I know where it comes from, Stevie boy, but I still think it's jank, my dude. We can also find greater discussions and representations through study of Sword's armed girl's Machiavellism, where he notes that one of the fascinating elements is that when we think of sword fighting and how they're portrayed in anime, we think of kendo, because that's what mangaka learned. Yet, when it comes to armed girls' Machiavellism, we're not working with kendo, we're working with kenjutsu. And with that in mind, what then do these girls represent, and how does that change the story?
Owing to the primacy of kendo in junior and senior high schools then, mangaka tend to rely on their own experiences with kendo to inform the way they design their fictionalized sword-based combat.
But there's also other bits. In my Japan Since 2020 video, thanks to Rebecca Suter's help, it mentions that writer Motoko Arai thinks of science fiction as a space in which regular and speculative theorists can converge, and these really play out here as well. Both Jiria Molstad and Oldurizen tackle Project Ito and Macross Plus respectively, both from the lens of science fiction, what it tells us, and specifically what it can do. Both of them tackle it from very different vantage points about two influential works that are criminally under-discussed in this area. For Jiria, he talks about one of the great titans of Zero Nendai SF, science fiction literature, really selling through surveys that we can think of Japanese sci-fi as being before Project Ito and after Project Ito, and thus situates a lot of these concerns specifically in Harmony itself. And Urizen is tackling a similarly under-discussed and insanely influential work, Macross Plus. To Urizen, they weave a theoretical tapestry that discusses what art is supposed to be, what it might mean, especially in the context of Japan, a country that depends on its soft power because it cannot depend on its hard power. And thus, this anxiety is mapped out and interrogated in Macross Plus, where Urizen situates entertainment as both liberating vehicles of expression, but also potentially worrisome vectors for seductive propaganda. And even more broadly, we can think about really fascinating feminist critiques as well. Both Mator and Metahawk discuss the role and challenges of women, though from very different degrees of difficulty in what are largely male-dominated spaces. For Metahawk, HG ni Koisuru grapples with expectations of what women are meant to like, to enjoy, to associate with, and how it means to be mature, to critically engage with gendered contours of that supposed maturity. In comparison, Mator similarly discusses women and machines through Rideback, framing Rin Okada as a symbol for revolutionary change. For Rideback is notably more dramatic and the stakes are higher, for focusing on a more male-dominated space, specifically the military, but they're both sides of the same coin. And these are intersections of general ideas, socio-political and socio-economic concerns, interlocked into questions alongside examinations of texts they all care about. So let's look at it this way. Was there anything that linked all of these together? Actually, most of the Novid submissions were quite even-handed. None of them were obnoxious or loud or obnoxiously loud, and none of them actually took down other material to buttress their works. In a lot of ways, it seemed like in respecting these works, they also afforded respect to other unspoken works as well. I think I've already said as well, so that might be a redundant claim. When I first started this challenge, I thought I'd get like 5 entries. And I thought they'd be like, just my boys, right? So this is a very hard challenge in a lot of ways. As someone who takes 1,000,000 years to make a video, 1 month at best, assuming you get the notice at the beginning, it's incredibly difficult to pull off if you're trying to make a particularly deep or involved video, especially if not used to making them. This can be really challenging for a lot of folks. Some of you, many of you, might be wondering why I didn't talk about your specific video in this one. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it in length on the stream, I just wasn't able to fit it into this contained script. So I'm going to go through that. I'm going to go through every single one, and I'm going to talk about what I liked. I promise, I'm not going to shit talk your video. But do think about this as a sort of general outlook as to sort of the numerous contours and vectors and directions where a lot of AnyTube is or might be. And even that AnyTube, right? AnyTube, that's a problematic term in the sort of Althusserian sense. Use code ALTHUSSER10 because there's a sort of sampling problem. Most of the people who would respond to this challenge are probably people who are already aware of my content, and thus it attracts and discusses a certain kind of content creator. I never got, say, King of Lightning or Uzumaki Khan kind of entry, and while we got more comedic creators like Manti and sometimes, What the What, and interesting comparative analysis of Nekopara and War and Peace, which was pretty interesting, the whole side of AnyTube, that whole side of AnyTube never really came out. And while FC Wheel Boomer and Anime Misfit talked about Ghost Sweeper Mikami and Pink, we never really got the older anime content creators. So I'm looking forward to next year, because there's going to be a next year. I don't know what's going to change, what's going to work, but I'm definitely doing it again. I hope it will be a fun challenge again for people. And for this one, I'm going to put a link to every video, every entry in the description. So I'm looking forward to that. More entries. Man, it's wild, right? Like, I expected like 5 entries, right? And I was like, okay, Jaden's probably going to be like one of them, because I talked to him about this, and I was like, okay, maybe Gil, but that goon didn't even submit, and then Dakota came out and was just like, nah, bro, don't worry, I got you, fam, don't worry, Sleeping Psyche, my dude. So Joe, where are your Novid submissions? Are they just like not going to exist? No. The month of December is going to have 3 videos. Because I couldn't decide. Oh my god.